This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss the second half of P.D. James's 1992 novel, The Children of Men. Welcome back. We are now on to the alpha part of this novel. We covered the omega last week, the first half. Second half, there was some changes to the world. I'm curious to know what you've thought of this novel compared to last week. Like, now that you've read the second half, what's your takeaways from it? What's your general thoughts about this novel?
Everywhere I thought the book may have been going, it didn't really go down those paths, and it may have just been from, bringing in some of what I thought, what happens in the movie and maybe thinking it's more similar. Very different, and maybe a little more hopeful than I was expecting.
So you found it hopeful. Interesting.
I felt that there was moments of hope, for sure. More than I was expecting.
I think, now it's weird because I'm realizing I only vaguely remember this movie. I was talking to somebody about it recently, and trying to remember when I would have seen it last, and I think I saw it in the theater, and the movie came out in 2006, and then I think I saw it again, like maybe a year or two later. I remember watching it on like a screen, like a TV screen, but then that would have been the last time I saw it, so it's probably been a decade since I've seen this movie. So understandably, I don't remember a lot of it, and I was thinking like this. I think this kind of takes the story further almost than what we see in the film, but I'll be curious to revisit that when we get back to the movie episode. Like, where does it go? I have some like memories of certain things, but like how it all holds together, I don't really remember.
We'll talk about it when we get to the movie.
Okay, but I do want to focus on this book because it is in and of itself has a very interesting story. Definitely goes places I wasn't expecting, and yeah, man, I don't know. I kind of feel like I just want to dive into summary so we can talk about specifics basically as soon as possible. But I guess in general, I enjoyed the second half quite a bit. I found it to be a more compelling read, more of a page turner in a sense, even though it wasn't ever really like a thriller or anything. Like, I did find myself eager to find out what happened next in a way that at times I wasn't in the first half. Their flight in the car, and it sort of becomes like a travel log or something, and the excitement that happens on the road. I don't know. I found it compelling, and I found it to be a page turner.
Some of these relationships I want to talk about as we move into this chapter summary here. So if you're ready, I'm ready to jump into that.
Okay. Yeah, so we're going to have full spoilers for the rest of the book as we progress through what happens. I have a summary here that's divided into 4 parts. So I'm just going to read them, 4 paragraphs. I'll read one at a time, and we can talk about that part of the book. So soon after Theo's return from his vacation, Miriam tells him that Gascoigne was arrested as he was trying to rig a Quietus landing stage to explode. The other fishes are about to go on the run, and Julian wants him, Theo, to join. Miriam reveals why Julian did not come herself. She is pregnant. Theo believes Julian is deceiving herself, but when the two meet, Julian invites Theo to listen to her baby's heartbeat. So let's stop here. This is obviously a big moment. We ended last episode kind of theorizing about whether or not he was actually going to go on a vacation. Apparently he did. He went and traveled to Europe for a little while and then came back. Were you surprised that happened?
Yeah, well, I just didn't think that was going to go well for him, but apparently nothing too catastrophic happened while he was gone, and he came back just in time for all the events to play out.
And he was away for 6 months, which I think is also like, it was kind of necessary to get Julian along in her pregnancy. So that may have been part of the narrative reason for doing it.
And did you, based on your knowledge of the movie, did you see the Julian pregnancy coming?
I guess I kind of did. Yeah, it felt like it was going to be Julian, but I don't know. I was undecided.
I had no idea. I did not think that was where this story was going, and then it started to feel really weird to me.
Okay.
because he has like this, and I don't know how much we talked about this last episode, but this love that he's automatically feeling for Julian, and she has this husband,
Rolf.
yeah, and things get a lot more murky as we go along here. What do you think of just this relationship being set up last half, and then seeing kind of his attraction to her, and it's more than attraction, his love for her, like
he mentions how he feels like he like drawn to her, and that perhaps he loves her, and that maybe there's a mutual love there, and that's maybe why she requests him. I don't know. It was tough for me to tell because a lot of it seemed like it was Theo kind of projecting onto her, but later in the book it kind of seems confirmed in a sense. Yeah, I guess I don't really know what to make of it. We kind of get like not a love triangle, a love square. We get everybody loves Julian in a way, right? And so she very much seems to me like this Mother Mary figure, right? And she's carrying essentially the new Jesus Christ. And there's a lot of that like religious symbolism. I noticed that there are essentially three men, which you could liken to the three wise men from the Bible, in Theo, Rolf, and Luke. Yeah, what a name to forget for a moment. Right, there's three men, and you have the midwife, and then you have Julian. And that's our five companions. Essentially, Theo takes the place of Gascoigne, who is sort of off camera, picked up by the SSP and apparently killed, is what we are told. And so now they're going to be on the run essentially, and they need Theo's help. Now, I thought it was very telling that he finds the baby and the pregnant woman, I should say, in a chapel. And there's sort of this almost holy moment of him kneeling at the side of the baby, and I like how he didn't believe it. Like he said, like, "Oh, it'll be up to me. I'll believe it. You tell me, and it'll be up to me to decide." And then as soon as he hears it, immediately doesn't believe. He's like, "No fucking way." And until he's confronted with it, and he feels the baby kicking, and that's when he knows it to be true. What did you think of that whole part?
Yeah, I was picking up on some of the religious stuff, but the second half really took it to the next level. Clearly very heavily influenced story by Christianity. The symbolism that's being drawn with kind of the salvation of the human race, this like second coming of the human race. This is the beginning of the next chapter. It's very evocative of what Christianity would have you believe. And I think that we talked about it with something like Good Omens, how people bring a lot to a story that has religion built into it. And I think that is, and I mentioned in Good Omens how it's really effective at engaging people really quickly without a lot of setup, because people are familiar with it in varying degrees. But I think that this book feel like the moments that you're talking about, they do feel like come to Jesus moments, like these huge moments of importance that would be written down in like a second Bible or something. It's like this. It's such a religious experience. It's so holy for this child to be born, and for these people to be shepherding this woman along her way, and keeping evil away from the child and from the birth, and they're just treating it with clearly a lot of respect and grandeur, I guess.
I don't want to say that it's overly heavy-handed, though. It never really felt that way to me. Like, it was always kind of there, and there's also a lot of darkness and like human weakness and some savagery that happens in the later half of the book here. Oh, yeah. And there's even a part later where Theo is sort of thinking about God and how if there is a God, that he's not a God of love, he's a God of weakness, or he's a god for the strong and the god of violence, and how that's like permeated this entire world. And
I agree with what you're saying, because Theo really, to me, is the reason why the book isn't so religious, because he doubts everything all along the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think that if you come into this book and you're a deeply religious person and you read this novel, it's going to be like setting off all sorts of things in your head. You're like, oh, this is the second coming, and this is clearly, God doing this and doing that, and it's going to speak to you on that level. But I think both of us are agnostic coming to this, we read it differently, and we see the religious things being said, but it did it in a way that wasn't like a turnoff for me, where it wasn't like too heavy-handed. So I was still able to enjoy it. And I liked the sort of like, is it or is it not? Is that something we're just bringing to it as humans who believe in this thing? The fact that Julian herself believes in it, and certain characters seem to. Are they just sort of bringing this story and giving it that holy importance based off their own, I don't know, human weakness? Does that make any sense of what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, well, I think it is. What you're saying is that the religion that they believe in is being touched upon because they're giving it that importance. Whereas like someone who maybe wasn't Christian or didn't believe in those things wouldn't have seen these as signs from God or something like that. It was just like a lucky happenstance.
Yeah. We don't see any like miracles, right? Other than the, quote unquote miracle of childbirth, if you want to view it that way. But other than that, like there's no like, oh yeah, clearly God intervened here, right? Like I can't think of any moments like that.
I feel like there are a couple of moments where I feel like the characters wish God had intervened.
Yeah. So during the group's flight, Luke is killed while trying to protect Julian during a confrontation with a wild gang of Omegas. Okay, before we get to that, actually, the summary skips over. They go to Jasper's house. They find he's killed himself, and they take his car, right? There's also a moment where Theo gets a gun, and it has one bullet in it, and he takes that with it. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, we got Chekov's gun here with one bullet in it. So this is obviously going to be important going forward. Who's going to get shot? What's he going to do with this one bullet? That was something that I was constantly thinking about. Maybe, I don't know, did that stand out to you? Is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's going to play a part, right? Like anything that's given importance or anything that's specifically a gun like this with one shot is given a certain amount of importance. So, if it's set up, it's got to go off, right, by the third act. So,
yeah, I mean, that's a simplification of it. And Chekhov's gun rightfully is a metaphor. It doesn't have to be about a gun. It can be about lots of things.
Right.
But it's essentially about setups and payoffs. But here it is a gun, and here it has a single bullet in it.
It's literally Chekhov's gun.
And there's several times where he mentions like the one bullet gun and all this stuff, and like you just know like there wouldn't be such. Oh, and it was also like actually a really kind of chilling, interesting moment where he sees the bullet and he doesn't know why was there one bullet left, and he said either it could be
a mercy.
Yeah, it's like, or is it like in case you want to join me, I left an extra bullet in the chamber, right? Because he shot himself. I don't know. Yeah, it was fascinating. What were the two options? Is it either it was a
weapon that you could use out and about if you needed it, or it was like if you needed to end it all and join him, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the Latin phrase actually fully meant and everything, but I think that was the gist of it.
Right.
I want to mention because you just talked about it, the Omegas. Were you under the impression that the Omegas were, I mean, this is clearly a radical group of Omegas, but this struck me as really interesting that these kids growing up in this environment would turn to basically just becoming this like tribe of like anarchists, like feral almost. I don't know, like a group of animals like ready to tear people apart and take human sacrifices. Or
they're described as like being the painted ones or something, having painted faces. They scalp people, apparently. They have some sort of ritual thing where they ambush cars and kill one person. Apparently it's very specific. They kill one person and then they burn the car and they let everyone else go. Yeah, I don't know. It definitely doesn't seem like this is all Omegas. This just happens to be like this one group that are like this. It seems like they've kind of been talked about as like almost a myth, like an urban legend, but they apparently are real. And it was an exciting scene, and obviously leads to some high drama. Let me read what happens here. So during the group's flight, Luke is killed while trying to protect Julian during a confrontation with a wild gang of Omegas. Julian then confesses that the father of her child is not Rolf, but rather the deceased Luke. Rolf, who believes he should rule the UK in Zan's place, is angered at the discovery, and he abandons the group to notify the warden. Okay, so that jumps over actually a lot of pages of book here. So we get the big confrontation, and then I actually thought it was pretty funny, but also clever for Theo to say, like, well, let's just join in the dance, and then maybe that'll throw them off enough to where we'll have a chance to escape. And it seems to work.
This was absurd to me. This felt like it was breaking some of the tension or breaking some of the world, just because it was such a weird thing to have happened. Rather than it being like it's this high drama situation, and then they're like, you know what? If we just dance and act like we're some of them, maybe it's like what you do in a zombie movie. Like you act like the zombies and you cover yourself in guts and you walk your way through. Right. So like it just seemed really absurd to me in this story. But ultimately, it was, an interesting choice. This was a sci-fi element. I don't even know if I would call it sci-fi. Maybe like an apocalyptic element that I wasn't expecting.
Well, it's almost like Lord of the Flies. Like they're out here as a wild group, and they've formed their own religion. They formed their own, hierarchy of power, and then like what they're gonna do and rituals. And I don't know. I could almost see it working like. If they truly believe in whatever this ritualistic dance is, that if the people start joining in, they're just gonna be like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's all do it together. I don't know. It's kind of bizarre and like definitely insane. Like, what the hell is even happening here?
It's very reminiscent of something that happens in the movie, just in a totally different way. And so I can kind of see what Alfonso drew from this for the movie, but also. A pretty brutal death. So
the big reveal, right, of that Rolf, who has all along been, saying that he is the father, and he's been, do we talk about how he thinks that he's going to be able to like rule the country once it's revealed that he's the father, and he thinks he's just going to take Zan's place and become the new ruler, and clearly he doesn't have like any better ideas. He's just going to be the new dictator is all he really seems to want. Theo doesn't like him from the get-go. And they're butting heads throughout this journey.
And this is Julian's husband.
Yeah, it's her husband. Yeah.
So this is like we're led to believe for the entire book so far that this is the father of the baby.
Right. But then Luke sees Julian and Rolf try and get away, and then like one of the Omegas goes to grab her, and then Luke basically like saves her by breaking away and says, "Take me instead. Don't take her." And then in doing that, it's like he's self-selected that he's going to be the sacrifice. So all the Omegas descend on him and like beat him to death with clubs. And it's actually like the way it's written, like Theo can hear the bones just like crunching, filling the air and stuff.
Yeah.
I just gotta give it to P.D. James. This book is really well written. And once I got into the style, I started to really appreciate the especially like the sensory details are really definitely done.
Well, it's really intelligently written too. Like it's not an easy read because I think it challenges you as a reader in terms of vocabulary and just sentence structure and all of that. But yeah, it gets pretty brutal, right? Even the suicide of
Jasper.
Yeah, his suicide is pretty brutal too. She keeps talking about the brains all over the place and how like goes into graphic detail of like how he killed himself by putting the gun in his mouth and his brains were everywhere. So it definitely goes there. It doesn't pull any punches. Wanted to talk about Luke being a pastor and then also sacrificing himself and kind of the allegory or the parallels there. To religion.
Do you think Luke knew he was the father?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I don't know. I guess I couldn't decide because she never says anything about like having told him that he's the father. But you would think that he would suspect that he could be at least.
Yeah, and I guess like whether he was willing to die to save the baby, if it was his or wasn't his, makes him a hero, and that sacrifice really powerful. But I just assumed that in his heart of hearts he knew.
It's like a gut punch to the reader too, because he's sacrificed himself and you're like, at the same time you're like, oh yeah, he did what he had to do to save them. But then when you find out that he was the father and you know that perhaps his sperm is like the thing that worked and then now he's dead, it's like potentially all hope is now lost, right? Like, no, you don't really know. Was that the one piece that you needed in order for this to continue to work? And he just died before anyone knew about it. And then on top of that, Rolf's betrayal, right? So it hits you on multiple levels.
Well, yeah, Rolf's betrayal, we have to talk about that separately. But it was interesting that they described how Luke had been able to dodge the sperm test and everything, basically.
Yeah, because he had epilepsy as a child or something.
Yeah, so I just thought that was an interesting way to be like, oh, maybe there's something scientific going on. Maybe it's something faith-based. Maybe, you know what I mean? Keeping that mystery alive all the way through.
Well, it's like the evils of eugenics, essentially, are what's prevented this from happening. It's the idea of like, oh, we can't have anyone who's weak, we can't have anyone who's got a deformity or has had a childhood sickness or something. They're exempt from the test, which is a eugenics idea. And then and then I like that that's the where it starts kind of working again, in that sector of humanity. I don't know. I don't know what that really says, but other than eugenics are bad.
Right.
A bold stance.
So Rolf's betrayal here.
Well, so first off, he feels betrayed.
Right.
He feels betrayed by what's happened. Obviously, it's his wife has slept with Luke. He didn't know about it. He's been deceiving himself into thinking that he is like the savior of humanity and that his sperm is so important. And they talk a lot about breeding, and it's unclear if he like thinks he's actually going to be like doing the breeding himself or what. Or if it's going to be more like a sperm collection thing. It definitely, I don't know. I always got the feeling from Rolf that like this guy was so power hungry that he was going to be a disaster anyway. So, we see him sort of, and I didn't know where this character was going. Like, is he going to grow from this, or is he going to, what's going to happen with him, right? And at first he's sticking around, and he seems to be taking it pretty well after having like, obviously it's very devastating for him at first, but then like the next day he seems to be like somewhat coping, and then all of a sudden he just disappears in the night one night, and then they immediately realize like, oh shit, he's going to the warden, and he's gonna like tell him and try and ally himself with the power now, and in hopes to get some of that power that he thought he was gonna get originally.
Now, after all of this that they've gone through to avoid the warden and just to keep the baby safe and all of that, his revenge, he thinks in some world he's going to go to the warden, tell him all this information, and then get power from that, or become more important in some way. And how is he not able to understand that they're clearly just going to take him, use him for his information, and then move on?
He's so dumb. I mean, like the whole conversation he has with Theo about how he thinks it's going to go down and how he's going to become the new leader of England. When you have like an entrenched dictator who is not going to give up power, it's just, I don't know. He always seemed like an idiot to me, and I believe that an idiot would think that this would work.
I want to talk about two things with Theo here. The first being he has this superiority complex, and it comes up when he's talking to Rolf, and Rolf is saying all this stuff, and just how he's basically like, I'm here because of the baby, and you guys are all morons, and you don't understand what's going on, and then him and Rolf have a conversation, and Rolf is like, you shouldn't be here, you anybody who's not educated like you look down on, and all that, which makes for interesting situations, especially like the situation where he is jealous or like angry in some way towards Julian because Rolf isn't the father, and then she slept with Luke as well, and he sees it as a betrayal because he loves her out of nowhere, and yet that was really interesting to me because we're in his head, we understand why he feels this way, and he says it himself that it's irrational. But I just thought that was a weird headspace to get into because he's mad at the betrayal of Rolf because it means that Julian was sleeping around, I guess. Yeah. And that like lowers her in his eyes.
Well, and there's even a moment where Julian is like kneeling over the grave, I think, of Luke because they buried him, and he has this image of her as being a defecating animal, and then he like immediately like it's like, oh, I shouldn't have thought that. And then I was like, well, why did the author put that in the book though? And I think it is that. It's like we're supposed to see that Theo in this moment, all of a sudden she's less holy to him. She's very animalistic in her, the fact that she was sleeping around, like you said. But like, why include that in the book as the author? And I think it is trying to say, like, on the one, it's the dichotomy of the holy and the very human, and like the very grounded, the animalistic part of it, right? And how those two things seem almost incompatible, I think is kind of where this book lives too, in some way.
Theo, we talked about it in the first episode, but he's such an unlikable character in so many ways. I mean, I assumed that we were going to see this arc, but it takes a long time for him to start to really come around as a character that we can at least get behind his actions and his thoughts, because for a long time it just seems like he's very just self-interested.
I agree with that. Now, they also do this thing where Theo reads from the Bible, I think, or a prayer book, as they're putting Luke into the earth. And this is where we actually get the children of men passage that you talked about last week. So I think it's probably best if I just read the passage here. This is, and forgive me, I'm not going to read it great because it's kind of that old Bible language. We'll see how I do. But here is the passage that the book apparently draws its name from. Lord, thou hast been our refuge from one generation to another, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever the earth and the world were made. Thou art God from everlasting and world without end. Thou turnest man to destruction. Against thou sayest, Come again, ye children of men. For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday, seeing that is past as a watch in the night. And then I think it skips a little bit, and then the other part the book gives us. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life through our Lord Jesus Christ. So, some of that's pretty familiar. We've heard ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Obviously, this is a very common funeral rite. The bit about children of men, how does that, I guess the question is, how does that pertain to this book? Why is it called that? And what's the purpose of it all? Easy questions.
Right. I feel like as you read it, I understand it more, but I still can't really put my finger on exactly what it's trying to say. But what I would guess is just the idea that through God there is salvation, and through Jesus there is salvation. But this ashes to ashes, dust to dust, it's basically saying like I think it's like one day everyone dies, but you can carry on through God. And I think they're putting it on this book and this situation as everything, maybe things are coming to an end, but like there will be some sort of new beginning. And I think like the children of men is like the next generation, or the follow-up to what was the norm before.
So the key line here is thou turnest man to destruction. So if you think about that as like the apocalypse that we're seeing now, the men have been turned towards destruction through the infertility. And then it says, again thou sayest, Come again, ye children of men. So again, children are to be born, right? And starting with this child that we're reading about here. And then, for 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday, seeing that is past as a watch in the night. So that's the part that is throwing me a little bit. I'm not really sure what exactly that's saying. Other than this is something that has been going on for 1,000 years, but it can seem as only yesterday. And then it says, seeing that is past as a watch in the night.
I think it's basically just saying like it's a very, in God's eye, it's very quick, right? It's like it's basically saying like all of this that's happened over 1,000 years has been really quick to his eye or something. But I don't know. I'm definitely out of my depth at this point. I think really what I draw from it is just that there's like a second chance, or like there's like a promise of another, I don't want to say salvation, but another chance.
So I think that's like kind of the biblical side of it, but I think there is also like sort of a more, I don't know, almost like meta meaning and grander meaning that I think the book is trying to get at, which I think I want to revisit once we get through the rest of the plot. So let's move on. Now there's another part that I know that my summary just jumps over that I do want to stop and talk about. And that's Theo has to go and rob this older couple of their car, and then come back and get because like their car got destroyed by the Omega, so they have to go get another car. And so he goes and he like has a home invasion, essentially, this older couple. He ties them up, and then he's like feels bad. He tries to get them water. He helps them each use the bathroom. They have this plan to where somebody who works for them is going to come and find them in the morning. So he's like, you just have to stay through the night. And he feels very guilty about it, but then he takes their car and whatever supplies he can find and goes to get Miriam and Julian. But what did you think of that whole section? Like, it goes on for quite a while, and we later learn that the older woman ends up dying. We don't know why, and I don't know. What did you think of that whole part?
I think there's a couple things being set up here. One more clearly than the other. He very clearly feels bad. in the moment. We can tell because he keeps going back and taking care of these people. But as we come to realize later, and it's kind of said in the book, he in some way was like, he was getting something out of it. He was enjoying the power. He was understanding what power meant. And like, there was something else there other than him just going to do exactly what he needed to do, take the car and go. So he feels bad, but it's almost like out of obligation, maybe. And then ultimately later, when he learns that the older woman died, he snaps and he's like, there was something else there. Like, I was kind of like drunk on the power and I was enjoying it. And I think that sets up ultimately what happens in the end, but we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, and I felt like it also brought back the death of his daughter in a way, because it's an accidental death that he is ultimately responsible. So it's like, I feel like these moments remind him that he is not something like special and holy, like that he is very human and that he is fallible and that he makes mistakes that lead to suffering and death.
One of my favorite things in the book is just because we've got to know this character so much, and there's kind of the line that he says, he's been able to do so many evil things without intending to, and like, what could he what could he bring about if he tried to be an evil person? And just talking about, you know, the death of his daughter and then the death of this woman. If he was actually trying to be an evil person, like, think about how much more damage he could do.
Yeah. All right, I'll get you the next part of the summary here. The group heads to a shack that Theo knows of from his childhood memories back with Zan. So Miriam delivers Julian's baby in the shack, who ends up being a boy, not a girl, as Julian had thought. Miriam then goes to find more supplies, and then after she has gone for too long, Theo goes to investigate. He finds Miriam dead, garroted in a nearby house. Theo then returns to Julian, but soon afterward, Julian hears a noise outside, and it's Zan. All right, so that covers a lot. We get the finding of the shack, the disposing of the car. They put it in the pond, and then the birth, which is actually like a really interesting scene, right? Like, it was written in such a way that I found pretty fascinating.
Theo is very clearly he loves Julian and she loves him at this point, and it's being stated multiple times just during the birth, and he's trying to help, and she wants him there. And then afterwards, Miriam leaves because she says that like her job is done and it's time for like Julian and Theo to be together with the baby and try to get the baby to start feeding.
I thought this was all very biblical too, like the idea of like, you know, Jesus in the manger in the barn, right, and or you know what have you, and this is like in a shed, and it's like it's very low tech. There's no one else there. It's just them. It also is described in such a way as like almost the three of them together were like one being, and he feels very bonded to Julian through this. I don't know. Yeah, it was all very interesting. I don't know what else to say about it other than I like it. It definitely made me think. It kind of highlighted the sort of like everyday miracle of childbirth, and how in this situation it would not seem every day because it hadn't happened in so long that feels very momentous.
When Miriam was leaving, I just had a really, really bad feeling. I was like, this is not going to go well.
Yeah.
Very clearly, it wasn't going to go well for her. And at this point, they're kind of just waiting.
I thought it was kind of flimsy, like the reason that she would have to leave. It was like he spilled some water, and then for some reason she's like, I have to go to the house to see if there's more. You stay here, Theo. She wants to be with you. And I was like, well, yeah, as soon as that was the case, I don't know if this is going to go well. What did you think about that whole thing and like the way he finds her?
Oh, I mean, that was definitely brutal. I thought she was just going to be gone and disappeared. I didn't think that they were going to like send a message with her body, basically.
It was kind of bizarre. Like, who garroted her and why was she left in that way? Why did they let Theo find her and not intercede at any point? Because I got the feeling that they must have been around, like, watching it, right?
Well, I think very clearly it was a message being sent. I just don't understand. I think the main reason is just to like let Theo know like 100% like they mean business. It's not about what anybody wants at this point other than Zan, and he has all the power.
Well, I think narratively it's also I think to further underline to us, in case we had any doubt, Zan is bad. And
yeah, that's true.
You know, we shouldn't root for that guy because he's evil.
But it's really crazy that he doesn't think that the baby's born yet. I guess that's jumping ahead a little bit, so we'll talk about that in a second. But Miriam leaving not only felt like a bad idea, but to me, felt like she was such an important character at that point, and it's highlighted that Julian doesn't really mourn Luke's death that much, the father of the baby, and yet when Miriam dies, she's so clearly distraught, and she seemingly cared so much more about this process that they all went through together, and like the birth of her baby, and how she died helping save Julian and the baby. And I just think that what do you make of that like she wasn't really affected by Luke's death, but Miriam's was so much more, even though Luke like effectively sacrificed himself for her.
I guess I read it more that now that the child has been born, she's able to sort of allow herself to feel these things. Before that, it was like she had a mission, and she was on that mission still. And until the child was born, it's like she couldn't let herself give into grief. And then in Miriam's death, it's kind of like the final straw, I guess, that breaks that. And so that was my interpretation of it. Although I think Theo kind of has this thought of like, oh, I can't believe she's so upset about Miriam and not about Luke. But I don't know if that's just his sort of perspective on it that we're getting, or if that's supposed to be more of like authorial, interpretation of what's happening. I don't know. Yeah.
I have one more question about something I was wondering how it struck you. This idea that they're on the run from Zan, and they don't want to be found before the baby's born. And so the baby's born, and then they ultimately kind of all agree and realize that like there's no way that they can outrun him any longer. They're going to be caught by Zan. So they're just waiting out this idea that they're going to be caught by Zan. Why was it, and like I kind of touched on it before, but why was it so important to them to have the baby born before Zan got to her, in your like other than like the power moves that he was going to make?
So they talk about this a little bit, and they imagine like if Zan had gotten there, he would have taken her, and it would have been televised, and there would have been a team of doctors standing around, and Zan would have been, the one to announce the birth of the child. And I think at first it seems just like the lack of privacy is pretty appalling, but then I think it is also supposed to be like, this is too important a moment for that. And to do it in that way would make it, I don't know, it would like lessen it in a way. It would make it more about that societal structure and that leader and that moment versus like a moment for all mankind that isn't supposed to be linked to any one government or any one person other than like the mother, I guess, of the child.
Yeah, I like that. I could, because it felt like it was all for nothing if you think of it in terms of just like what's actually going to happen. Because ultimately, like if Zan catches them, he's still gonna, even though the baby has been born, he's still gonna be like, put the baby up on this pedestal and be like, look what we've been able to do in our country, and still make it about him. But yeah, I thought that it was interesting that the characters, it was so important to them that this miracle, this moment happened without him around. And Julian talks about the idea of like evil being around during the birth of the child, and I think that also kind of this idea of like evil vibes or evil.
Well, let's get to the final bit here, because I think the final bit changes things a little bit, and then also recontextualizes maybe what's going on here. Yep. So Theo and Zan confront each other outside the shack, and they both fire at each other, one shot. The sudden wailing of the baby startles Zan, causing him to miss, as Rolf had thought the baby would not be born for another month, so Zan didn't expect the baby to be born. Theo shoots and kills Zan. He removes from Zan's finger the coronation ring, which Zan had taken as wearing as a symbol of authority, and he seems poised to become the new leader of the UK, at least temporarily. That's maybe some editorializing on the part of the person who's writing the synopsis. Now, the other members of the council are introduced to the baby, and Theo then baptizes the baby, and that's the end of the book. All right, so let's back up a little bit here. I did not expect this book to end with a like showdown gunfight between Zan and Theo. That was a pretty surprising turn. It seems like, I don't know, kind of contrived to get to this moment to be here. Like, I don't know if I really buy that this would ever actually occur, but it is what happens in the book. Our one bullet is used, and it shoots Zan through the heart. There was, I was remembering that I think there was a moment early in the book where we see Theo doing some target practice or something, shooting. So it was kind of set up that he could be a decent enough shot to pull this off. What did you think of that whole bit?
To get back to the Chekhov's gun thing, I think it's funny that it literally is Chekhov's gun in this situation. You know what I mean? Like, as you were saying before, it's like, could be used metaphorically, could be used for, any number of things being set up and then paid off at the end, but it literally is Chekhov's gun. So it went off as is normal within a narrative like that.
Although I guess in the defense of it, it wasn't introduced in the first act. It was introduced in the second act.
Well, I thought Chekhov's gun was like, if it's set up, whatever act it's set up in, the following act is when it's supposed to be fired, right?
I think what I've always heard is like, if there's a gun in the first act, it must go off in the third act. But
right.
It's all like not even really true storytelling wise. It's more just about setups and payoffs. Essentially, if you set something up, that like there becomes a narrative expectation to have it pay off eventually.
There was a period of time where it was all the rage to subvert that too, obviously, to set something up and then not have anything pay off from it. And it's like this sort of, ironic thing that can happen. But anyway.
Right.
So Zan shows up for the showdown and
by himself, alone, apparently, is in front of the cabin, facing down Theo.
Right, and he's like showing up and acting like he knows the whole situation. He's like, I have helicopters ready, I have ambulances ready to take the baby, and the best care is going to be given. And then something happens where Theo says like, what's going to happen to her, and then kind of offhandedly, Zan is like, yeah, I'll probably just end up marrying her or something.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting, and look into his character even more, because it's literally all just about power moves for him. And we know this, but there's kind of a flashback that happens earlier on, and Zan is talking about how like he wants to join the army and then potentially get into politics, and he's kind of shitting on what Theo wants to do, which is, be studious and be an academic. But in that moment, Theo knows like, okay, if this is what he wants, this is what he's going to get. So he's going to become a huge politician, and he was able to angle himself to be this dictator. Really interesting that he's basically just saying like, yeah, I'm going to marry her for the popularity boost, plus the idea that everyone will praise him as the leader even more.
And that seems to be one of the final straws for Theo, to make him want to shoot him, right? Because he's in love with her and he can't stand the idea of it. Ultimately, it feels like the patriarchy is alive and strong in the end here. We get these two men sort of discussing her fate without her even being a part of the conversation. And then, we see Theo kill Zan and then take the coronation ring and put it on. And then apparently people just start listening to him as if he is the new leader. I thought that was pretty bold. Do you think that would go down that way? Would people just respect the ring?
I just don't know. I mean, when he was putting it on, so I like the idea behind this, right? It's the idea that Theo, who was this selfish guy, kind of started to get a redemption arc going, and then in the very end, we're asked the question of like, is he going to do the right thing, or is he going to do the wrong thing and abuse power just in his own way? A way he thinks to be the correct way, and we, being so close to this character, think, oh, hopefully like whatever he does will be good for everyone. What he should be doing is basically saying like the dictatorship is the wrong way to go about this.
Yeah, but instead he's like, I'm going to wear the ring for a time, and then I'll decide if I want to take it off.
Right. He wants to grapple with this power and see if he can wield it, which is, ultimately, I think we know that that's a foolhardy thing to even attempt.
It seems like he's sort of become Rolf here in the end, right?
Right. Power corrupts. He's going to be corrupted by this, whether it's because everyone thinks what they're doing is the right thing. So yeah, here at the end, and he slides.
I mean, that's our view of it, and I tend to agree with you. But you could possibly say like, oh no, he'll abdicate this, and once he doesn't need to anymore, he'll set aside the ring and he'll set aside his power.
Well, maybe. Well, in terms of the story, yeah, we're happy because he's able to use the ring to basically squash the situation and make sure that Julian's okay and the child's going to be cared for in the correct way. But he does this thing where he's like sliding the ring off his finger, trying to decide, which I thought was, kind of clever. And I actually thought he was going to put it on to get everybody to stand down and then take it off. But he didn't.
I thought he was going to take it off and put it on Julian.
Oh, interesting.
That would have been a turn, right? But no.
Or the baby. Just slip it on the baby's arm.
Yeah. But none of those things happen. He leaves it on, and then there's like, kind of a, I don't know, almost too much scene of the baptism where like he's crying, and then his tears are mixing with blood, and then he uses that to like draw a cross on the baby's forehead, and then like that's the end. And that was where it was like, oh boy, this is really, really getting heavy-handed with the sort of religious themes here. So yeah, what did you think of that final moment of the baptism, christening, I guess?
I'm assuming the reason he was the one doing the christening is because he holds the ring now. He's like given the power to, because he's very clearly not a believer in any way.
Yeah.
Throughout the book, at least, and maybe he's come to some sort of faith with all the this miracle that he's seen around him, and the influence of the people that are around him. But it was weird that he was the one doing the christening, and that it was so immediate. I mean, I get it, because that's what people do when children are born. A lot of times is like the baby's like baptized really quickly. But yeah, I don't know if it was really necessary. And a lot of this ending felt to me really wrapping it up in a nice bow. And maybe I'm just comparing it to the book to the movie in my head, but it felt really final. And I kind of was hoping for more of an open-ended ending.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And it seemed like, I don't know, on the surface, it seems a little bit stretching of my credibility, or of the author's credibility. It's like, would the dictator himself truly like show up and engage in a gunfight one-on-one with this guy? And then would his followers immediately follow the new person who murdered him? Like you shoot the king, and then you pick up the crown, you put it on essentially, and then everyone goes, "Oh, you're the new king." Is that really the way this would go down? Or would they just gun down this guy immediately? Like the guys in the woods, just shoot him, just shoot Theo, right? Like,
it's just a little too happy for me. Like I think that if he had like put the ring on and like maybe people hesitated but then killed him or something, I just don't know if I don't know. I think
it's not ultimately that happy, because he could be the new dictator. It just feels flimsy. Like I just don't know that I believe that it would go down that way, I guess. In a sense, but ultimately I guess it wasn't a huge problem. It just was like, okay, I don't know. It felt a little contrived. All right, so that's the end of the book, man. What was your overall thoughts on this novel? Now that we've talked about this whole thing, and did it change from beginning to end?
It was just so much different than I was expecting. And I know that I've said this multiple times because I keep comparing it in my head to the film, but it's so different and so much closer to this character than I thought we were going to get. And it's so clearly his perspective, which I think gives it an interesting edge and an interesting kind of point of view. I don't know. I liked how they played with his arc and like whether because the more traditional arc would have been like he's a piece of shit and then he becomes a better person and then by the end he's a good person. And here it's like kind of left somewhat open-ended. It's like, is he going to be a new dictator? What's going to happen here? But I think ultimately it's written more in the idea that like he's going to do good for everyone because he's learned from all of these experiences he's been through. And I still kind of cling to the idea that this is a story that could also take place in the same world as the movie, because I like the idea that maybe like because the way that the pregnancy is brought about in the movie is so much different, and I like the idea that maybe like at the same time two women are pregnant, and it's like the return of this humans like fertility and everything. I don't know. I just think that's like a fun little headcanon I keep playing with, but yeah. I was expecting it to be a little dark all the way through. And I guess it was kind of.
So why does he throw out his journal, his diary? He throws it into the pond at one point.
I think it's probably because he's ashamed of the way that he was looking at people and the person that he was at the beginning and the way that he was judging people and kind of his thought process. And maybe, some of the stuff that I was talking about, how he was like so reluctant to help when it's so clearly the right thing to do.
So he, in a sense, he's leaving the past version of himself behind in that moment.
I think so. I think it's that turning over a new leaf.
I like that read. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of little moments that I feel like we could highlight and talk about. Like, and try and figure out what do they mean. I imagine there's probably been a lot of like really in-depth critical analysis out there that written about this book. I could be wrong, but it just seems like it's rife for that sort of stuff. Like there's a moment when the car is disappearing into the pond and he has like a vivid almost dreamlike thing where he imagines him and Julian and Miriam all trapped in the car and like drowning, and that seemed bizarre, and it was like, why was that included? And I don't know, is there a reading of this book where you could say like, oh, that's what actually happened, and then like everything we saw is actually just like a dream, and like they actually crashed the car into the pond? I don't know. But I don't know. Did any of that occur to you in that moment?
No, not that wasn't really anywhere where my head went. But you just reminded me of this whole argument where Rolf and Theo are fighting over who's gonna drive the car, and then ultimately Rolf, and it speaks to his character, but he's so arrogant about having to drive the car and being the leader, and then he ends up like fucking it up somehow and like popping a tire.
Yeah.
I just thought that was really funny because you brought up the car. So much car trouble in this movie, and so much like needing to get a car and needing to get supplies, and it becomes really this like road survival story.
Yeah, I enjoyed all those parts, and it seems like I feel like I've been overall fairly critical in this analysis, but like I enjoyed reading this second half of this novel. I thought it was a compelling read. Like I said, in a sense, it turned into kind of a page turner for me. I was able to read a lot of it in just one sitting, and yeah, I found it enjoyable. I'm glad I read it. I think it brought up a lot of powerful, philosophical, religious, what does it all mean sort of thoughts in my head, which is always good. I like engaging with that sort of stuff. And so ultimately, I'm glad I read it. I think if you're a fan of the movie and you're curious about it and you've gotten this far, you should check out this novel because it seems like you're interested enough in it to listen to us talk about it. If you are, I think it can be a rather enjoyable read.
Yeah, and I think bringing all of this information and kind of this world building into the movie to maybe add a little more texture, I think that's going to be a lot of fun to kind of piece together our own like headcanon, like I was talking about with maybe these stories taking place at the same time. Probably isn't, if you look at the really nitty gritty, it's probably not going to be able to happen in the same world very clearly. I would also be really interested to hear another viewpoint on this because we very clearly came to it with a certain kind of headspace and philosophical background. Like how does this read for someone who is really religious? Do you think that they engage with it and enjoy it? Do you think that they turn away from it a little bit and see it as kind of not in line with a lot of the things that they believe? I don't know. I think that'd be kind of interesting to hear a different perspective. So if anybody does feel differently, definitely write in and let us know.
Absolutely. That did remind me of the other thing. I wanted to revisit that Children of Men title and how it could, apply. And I think here at the end, I know Theo even has a thought of like how this child is born and there's a murder and there's betrayal and there's someone else gets murdered and there's all this violence and human weakness. And so in that sense, I think that's the other Children of Men, like the idea of like this is all sort of created by humanity, and this child is born into it, is not a saint, but is in fact born to a situation that's very frail and very, I guess human in the like dark sense, like human in the animal sense. And so at the same time as being holy, and at the same time, it's like that dichotomy. And like I said earlier, like I think that's where this novel lives. I think that's, to me, also what this title means. It's like on one hand, it's talking about the biblical verse and God and all that, and on the other hand, it's like ultimately this child is born to a person, and this person is very human and down to earth in a sense. Does that make sense? Yeah,
you actually just kind of made me think of something. Is there something there with this sort of, because I kept talking about like this second chance, or like this new start, and it's like all of this destruction and all of this evil was brought about, and it's like that's a chapter ending, and like the potential of innocence and the potential for a new start and a new beginning, and something different than all of the destruction and everything that humanity's built up to. Is it saying like with this child a new generation comes, and maybe it can learn from the past generation and try to avoid running into the same obstacles?
Yeah, and I don't think it's no accident that Theo accidentally killed his own child and has been living with the guilt of that, and then he is like so integral in bringing about the second coming, the new race and the new child. And so this, I think you're right on the money as far as like a second chance that this represents for Theo. And so in that sense, yeah, I mean, I guess it is hopeful in a way. And even though it's still like everything's still couched in like there's probably going to be another dictator. Things are probably still going to be miserable. It's unclear whether or not this is something that's going to be able to truly start a new leaf and start a new race, or if it's going to be a solitary person who there's even like there's a dark reading of it where like, what if this child can't have can't have kids, and like what if Julian can't have another child, what then? And then that's pretty dark
like
too.
what if it was really Luke all along, and he like brought about one more child, and like it could have been continued, but now he's dead. And I there was that interesting conversation when before the gunfight, when Zan was talking about how like we'll see like if he's able to have the Omegas when he gets to like 13, 14, 15, whenever like the other Omegas will be like somewhere around like 40, and like maybe there will be some sort of continuation there, like he'll be able to breed with Omega women and then like help bring about the new race. And I don't know, I was really interesting, and they set up a lot of interesting questions, I would say, because it's like they aren't answered, which does leave it kind of open-ended, which I do appreciate.
How ethical is that, and how do we feel about it? And it seems like there's tons of potential problems with it, right? And so much rides on this, and we don't get that future to see if it all works out or not. I guess it's left for the reader to decide. Do they think that it actually does work out in the end? But yeah, I'm happy to leave it here, man. I'm excited to watch this movie and refresh my memory of what actually goes down in it. I remember it's being a very well-made movie, so we're going to get into some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. You're going to talk to me about some of the filmmaking that's going on there, and I'm excited to learn about it. Yeah,
I mean, Alfonso Cuaron, he's a master filmmaker. Everyone knows that at this point. I think honestly that this is his best piece of work. So I'm really excited to jump back into it and kind of refresh myself on it as well. And yeah, I'm going to dig in for all the little nitty-gritties to see kind of his process and like what he was bringing to it and why he changed what he did. And I think it'll be a good watch. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so hopefully you will come back and join us for that. But real quick before you go, we have a YouTube channel. We just put up Altered Carbon coverage. It's now on there, so make sure to check that out on YouTube and subscribe while you're there. Also, we wanted to thank Ben E. for being a patron. It's been a while since we thanked him. He's been a patron for a long time now, so huge thank you. You help keep the show going with your continued support, and we really appreciate it.
Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film. And join our Council of Inklings. This project was brought about because of a poll. We were looking for interest in sci-fi projects, and it seemed like people were pretty excited about this one, so we decided to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you wanted to figure out how to become a patron yourself, go to patreon.com/inktofilm. You can get access to all sorts of bonus content on there. We're going to be recording a new bonus episode here soon. We haven't decided exactly what it's going to be, but we'll be announcing it on social media.
Thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts, and thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's going to be it for this week. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.